The forest smelled alive that morning, as though the damp earth itself had been waiting for me. Cool sunlight filtered through tall canopies of oak and maple, the leaves whispering softly in the breeze. To anyone else, this was just another forgotten patch of wilderness tucked away on a back road in the county. But to me, it was more than land, it was an opportunity, one I'd been waiting months to secure. My name is Luke Porter. I was 38 years old, working as a county forester, when I signed the deed for 190 acres of surplus state property. The county had auctioned this parcel off quietly, and I'd fought hard, waiting for just the right moment to throw down cash on a dream I'd been watching for years. The paperwork was clean, the survey professional, and the certificate of title unblemished. In every way that mattered, this forest was mine. I pulled up the dirt access road in my aging pickup, the bed loaded with surveying tools, laminated property documents, trail markers, and supplies. All of it was meant to begin laying out boundary work so I could fully map what I now owned. I'd pictured this moment for weeks, stepping onto land that legally belonged to me. No disputes, no questions. A peaceful beginning. Instead, within minutes, I found myself face to face with Paula. She came striding down the narrow dirt lane like she was marching into battle. A neon yellow vest hung across her shoulders, the kind usually worn by crossing guards or traffic control workers. But this one wasn't official. It had the words "Show Security" scrawled in bold black marker across the chest. Tucked beneath her arm was a clipboard, stuffed thick with papers and handwritten notes. I'd heard a little neighborhood gossip about her. Since buying this land, that she was self-appointed president of an aggressive homeowners association nearby, but I hadn't expected her to find me so. "Quickly, you can't park here," she barked before I even had the chance to cut the engine. "This is private HOA property. You're trespassing." Her voice carried the authority of someone used to winning arguments not through facts but through sheer volume. I stepped out of my truck slowly, taking in the scene around me. Wide trunks of hardwood trees surrounded us, their roots sprawling across the earth like old veins. A simple trail curved into the distance, with little wooden signs marked neatly, "Community Nature Path." At its entrance, Paula stood firmly, arms crossed, making herself the physical embodiment of a stop sign. "This land actually belongs to me now," I told her calmly, reaching into the inner pocket of my jacket. I unfolded the deed, my deed, holding it out for her to read. The official county watermark gleamed faintly under the slanted rays of morning light. "I bought it 3 weeks ago at auction. Clear title, full ownership." Her eyes flickered wide for just 2 seconds before narrowing back into hard little slits. She snatched the paperwork like it was contraband, scanning furiously as if the ink itself would confess to a typo. "This says you own everything from the county road all the way to Deer Creek," she hissed, tapping the parcel description. "That includes our walking trail. That includes our picnic tables." "That's correct," I replied, my tone steady. "That's what the boundaries say. Purchased legally." Her face flushed with crimson. "You can't just take community land like this. Families have been using it for years. We've maintained those trails. We've installed benches. We've created a space for everyone, and you waltz in here and post some paperwork, you'll destroy everything." For one brief, fleeting moment, I admired her energy. Misplaced though it was, she carried the zeal of someone who genuinely believed her position. But her passion didn't change reality. "I'm not here to destroy anything," I told her firmly. "I bought this land to conserve it. But from this moment forward, any projects, any paths, benches, campsites, require my permission. That's the law." Unslinging my hammer from the truck bed, I pulled out laminated copies of my deed and survey for clarity. Marching over to the trailhead, I nailed the documents onto a sturdy oak tree where everyone could see them. The sound of steel striking metal brackets echoed through the forest. Paula gasped as though I'd desecrated a holy relic. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice climbing into a shrill pitch that sent startled birds scattering from the branches above. "This forest has been designated for community use. We have zoning rights and approval." I cut her off gently. "I've checked the records through the planning office. This parcel has always been county surplus, never once zoned as HOA property, never community land. You've been mistaken." That's when I saw them, half hidden under leaves near the base of the oak tree, chunks of old concrete with embedded survey caps, the official kind used decades ago in government surveys. Unlike the temporary wooden stakes Paula's neighbors had nailed into the soil, these markers were real, permanent, official. I made a mental note. They'd be important later. I'm not in your HOA, I said clearly, facing her squarely. I never was and I never will be. This forest is now private property. Mine. If you or anyone else wants to keep walking the trails, you'll need permission. For a long moment, her jaw simply dropped open, her mouth forming silent protests her voice couldn't create. Then finally, this isn't over. She spat, spinning on rubber heels. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling county planning. We'll see how long this little game lasts. I stood in the dappled sunlight, watching her retreat up the road, her HOA security vest flapping like some ridiculous cape. And though I tried to tell myself she was only blowing smoke, that the law was firmly on my side, I couldn't shake the irritation from her blatant assumption. She hadn't even considered my deed might be legitimate. She assumed she could bully me into surrender. That evening I checked my emails. A message from the surveyor I'd hired waited patiently in my inbox. Luke found some discrepancies with current trail markers. The concrete posts don't exactly line up with the wooden HOA ones. You'll want to see this in person. I read those words over and over while the shadows lengthened across my kitchen. Discrepancies. The land I had thought was clean-cut might be anything. But, and if Paula's enraged reaction earlier was any indication, my first day of ownership was only the beginning of a far bigger problem. The following days felt less like settling onto my new land and more like being dragged into someone else's performance. At first I convinced myself Paula's tantrum on the trail was nothing but fury at losing a patch of woods she'd come to treat as her own. I expected her to stomp back into the subdivision, fume during her coffee mornings, and eventually move on. Hopeful, naive thinking. What I didn't anticipate was how far she'd go, or how quickly. The very next morning, a neon envelope flapped against the side of my shed, pinned there by masking tape. Bold letters read, "Fine notice, unauthorized structure." According to Paula's paperwork, my shed, a perfectly legal outbuilding stamped with the county permit 2 years ago, was in violation of HOA forestry standards and subject to a $200 penalty. I laughed out loud at first, peeled it from the wood siding and tossed it into the trash. But laughter curdles quickly when jokes start piling up. That afternoon, a low buzzing sound dragged me from my work. Stepping outside, I shaded my eyes against the clear blue sky and spotted a consumer drone hovering directly above my roofline. It hung motionless, camera eyepiece swiveling, recording. I waved, then pointed toward the property line, shouting, "Private land!" The drone only dipped lower, buzzing its electronic protest. Before zipping back toward the subdivision, I was too stunned to even curse. 2 days later, I found another notice nailed to a fence post by the trail. This one cited me for unauthorized trail creation. Apparently, deer tracks worn smooth by generations of movement along a ridgeline were now considered illegal hiking paths for which I owed an environmental impact fee. The absurdity finally registered. Paula wasn't going to sulk quietly in her HOA bubble. She was escalating into an outright harassment campaign. I called my lawyer, a man named Richards I'd worked with in forestry disputes over timber contracts. He sounded both amused and hesitant. "Luke, let me be blunt. 99% of what she's doing is legally meaningless. She can create all the paper trails she wants. If she doesn't hold jurisdiction over your parcel, it's equivalent to me fining you for breathing on my lawn." But his voice dropped lower. "If she's filing these with county departments or code enforcement, then it becomes a headache. You'll waste time disproving nonsense. And the drone?" I asked. "Document it. File a trespass claim." But again, it's harassment theater. She's banking on annoyance wearing you down. Annoyance, yes. But paired with timing that wasn't accidental. That weekend, an official-looking letter arrived in the mail, stamped with a heading, "Woodland Hills Community Association Legal Department." The letter accused me of 3 years' worth of unpaid HOA forestry fees, a balance of $400 with threats of immediate property seizure if payment was not received within 10 business days. The words property seizure jumped out like they were dripping in red ink. Of course, the errors shouted louder than the threats. Mismatched fonts, duplicated dates, and a return address to a P.O. box that Google Maps revealed as a gas station mail drop. But still, someone deliberately printed this. Someone wanted me unsettled. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a binder marked evidence, and sat back at my kitchen table staring at the absurdity. The land purchase had been an open and shut public auction. Paula had zero jurisdiction, yet she walked around acting as if her clipboard gave her more authority than a signed deed from the county. The real danger wasn't her paperwork, it was her persistence. That suspicion solidified when Nate Jensen, the quiet programmer from next door, knocked on my door later that evening. His eyes darted nervously over his shoulder as though Paula had cameras on every street. "Got a minute?" he asked. On the porch, Nate spoke so softly I had to lean in. "I've been documenting Paula's stunts for months. She's different than most HOA presidents. Obsessed, ruthless. People don't push back because she makes life miserable if they do." From his pocket, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through screenshots like a detective revealing case files. "Look here. Trail maintenance fees, emergency landscaping charges, assessments for improvements. None of it goes into the HOA's community account. Every payment routes directly into Paula's personal bank." I blinked. "You're serious?" Nate nodded grimly and swiped again. "See this? These are HOA meeting minutes. Not a single one has a treasurer's signature for the past 2 years. That means every fee collection is technically invalid. If anyone challenged her legally, those charges collapse instantly." The images on his screen sent bile crawling up my throat. What started as petty fining games was now sliding into fraud. Paula wasn't just bossy. She was embezzling, siphoning thousands under the shimmer of authority. For months, maybe years. And now she was pointing her scheme directly at me. "Wait," I said, staring at a particular email screenshot Nate pulled. "What's this line about development rights?" "That's the scarier part," Nate whispered. He scrolled to a chain of email exchanges between Paula and a construction contractor. "She's been telling people she controls this forest property. Said she's moving forward with something called Woodland Luxury Retreat. She's already advertising it." The words blurred as adrenaline pounded in my veins. Luxury retreat. Plans scribbled across emails, cabins, picnic lodges, even a spa area, on my land. Nate's finger slid across the screen. More evidence. Marketing drafts, glossy concept images, preliminary contracts with suppliers. Paula hadn't concocted this retreat idea yesterday. It had been simmering for months, maybe years, and that explained everything. The fake fines, the drone, the harassment. She wasn't an eccentric HOA president hungry for control. She was a fraud artist staging a land grab. I leaned back against the porch railing, staring into the hollows of my forest where sunlight stretched through old oak branches. Every instinct screamed at me that this wasn't a neighborly dispute. It was a campaign. She was using every HOA trick to build a narrative in which my deed meant less than her performance. And if I didn't counter her, loudly and publicly, she might succeed in timing everything to her advantage. The harassment continued. Fake park signs appeared nailed to my trees, claiming the forest was private HOA green space. Residents began whispering whenever I crossed into town. Even Nate admitted most people signed Paula's petitions out of fear rather than belief. Better to pay a fake fee than have her unleash board citations on your flower beds. One afternoon, I filmed Paula herself pacing the edge of my land, waving her clipboard around like a judge's gavel, lecturing 2 families out for a walkabout. "Illegal ownership documents." She pointed to my laminated deed posted at the trailhead and called it forgery. When I shouted that I had the county title in hand, she sneered so loud it cut across the field. "Your little papers don't matter, Porter. The community decides what's valid here." That sentence chilled me more than any fake fee. The community. She was weaponizing collective fear as a blunt object. And if she got enough neighbors convinced, or at least too intimidated to argue, she could stall, confuse, and maybe even muscle her way into starting real construction. That evening, back inside, I realized that Paula's harassment wasn't random skirmishes. It was strategy. A steady drumbeat meant to make me second-guess the security of my own land, to corner me into wasting thousands in legal back and forth while she gathered the appearance of legitimacy through sheer audacity. So far, she'd fired the opening rounds. Fake fines, drones, letters, harassment. But the war was only beginning. Somewhere behind her fury, behind the clipboards, she had a bigger plan. I didn't know what shape it took yet, but I knew she wasn't improvising. I slid all of her documents, Nate's screenshots, drone photos, and my own records into a thick binder labeled HOA harassment, evidence file. Because one thing was growing clearer by the day, Paula wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. And if my hunch about that so-called luxury retreat was right, her boldest move hadn't even arrived yet. By the time a week had passed, the harassment had evolved into something much darker, and the picture came together faster than I wanted. It was one thing to deal with Paula's clipboard charges and her drones circling above my timber roofline like nosy vultures, but it was something else entirely to realize that she was engineering her nonsense into a larger con. The first crack opened when Nate returned, this time with a heavier stack of evidence, leaving his eyes tired from days of lurking quietly behind a computer screen. "She's not just squeezing residents with fake trail fees," he muttered, sliding phone screenshots and printouts across my rough wooden porch table. In broad daylight, with the forest behind us, I stared at marketing brochures printed on glossy stock, their folds gleaming in the sun. They advertised woodland luxury retreat, complete with elegant cabins rendered in computer design, a sparkling creek walk adorned with yoga decks, and a lodge promising exclusive private access to pristine woodland space. There were happy families staged on patios, moms in linen dresses stretched against spa hammocks, businessmen clinking glasses near a stone pavilion, all of it wrapped in Paula's familiar handwriting at the bottom of the rollout flyer, identifying her proudly as Project Director. This wasn't some little scam about HOA fees anymore. She had invested thousands in designing, advertising, and even accepting prepaid deposits for fantasy weekends at a retreat center, on land she never had title to. Customers, real customers, had already booked with her. I could almost feel my pulse pounding against the tightness in my chest as Nate scrolled through emails Paula had sent to surveyors and contractors. She spoke as though she owned the rights already, telling crews to ignore potential deed disputes while promising payment as soon as development funding clears. More shocking still, I saw records of her opening a business registration 6 months prior, naming herself as managing partner of Woodland Luxury Retreats LLC. The listed coordinates for development didn't match my deed. They pointed to public parklands miles away. But she hadn't corrected it. She'd weaponized the confusion as a shield, banking on bureaucracy moving slower than her lies. Right there in the gorgeous daylight, sitting at my table with Nate's phone glowing between us, her confidence suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't trying to prove she owned my forest. She was racing to make her construction so visible, her project so far underway, that no authority, judge, or neighbor group would dare undo it. It only worsened when I compared Nate's screenshots with the physical evidence outside. Bright orange survey flags had appeared deep in my woods, planted with geometric precision that reeked of professional design. I walked the forest one afternoon, sunlight pouring through the canopy, and found tripods, leveling equipment, and fresh chalk markings along the seasonal creek. This was no amateur job by a meddling HOA president. Paula had real contractors on site during the day, not as sneaks in the dark, but confidently measuring lines in broad daylight as though the entire forest were ready for breaking ground. She had faked new private HOA park signs. I'd seen them freshly staked that very morning, paint still gleaming wet under the sun when I pressed a tissue against them, and came away with streaks of bright green. Worse yet, she had rallied sympathetic residents, presenting herself not as a thief but as a protector. A daytime community huddle at the trailhead turned into a mini rally, in which Paula raised her voice like she was hosting a rally for neighborhood salvation, accusing me of plotting to bulldoze everything into a commercial shopping center. "This man's deed is a forgery," she declared, pointing at my laminated survey nailed into the tree. "He plans to ruin our woods and sell to retail developers." Shock rippled across the gathering, residents whispering until an older woman named Nora cut through the noise. "Let's see the documents," she demanded, flatly squinting in the bright sun. And once again Paula dodged, claiming lawsuits were pending, that the charter is undergoing review. It was like watching an illusionist caught mid-trick, her grin tightening as my own documents, stamped, sealed, certified, were compared against bleeding ink on Paula's handmade signs. Several residents shifted uncomfortably then, their doubts opening, and I seized the moment by producing my phone, swiping through photos of the old survey posts embedded in the soil, concrete capped and government marked. An undeniable truth glinted in that hard golden daylight. Paula's wooden stakes didn't align with reality. My photos indeed did. Murmurs rose louder, now tinged with suspicion, not at me but at her. Each detail was like sunlight burning away fog. Her smugness wavered then, for the first time. Still, the more evidence we uncovered, the more staggering her scheme became. Turns out Paula hadn't confined her manipulation to HOA fines, not by a long shot. Flyers kept surfacing in mailboxes. Neighbors revealed emails promising investment packages. And even local dignitaries had RSVP'd to what she was calling a grand dedication ceremony for the retreat. Contractors messaged Nate about being unpaid for preliminary landscape clearing. And a local pharmacy clerk even slipped me a manila envelope of promotional flyers printed at her daughter's design shop. There it was in ink: Woodland Luxury Retreat grand opening next month. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a business pitch. She had raised deposits, promised amenities, and scheduled investors to visit my forest as if she had every right to the soil beneath my boots. But the most surreal blow arrived not from glossy marketing, but from my own quiet forest walk late one afternoon. Sunbeams cut through the canopy, and I stepped into a low clearing near my southern ridge only to find professional-grade stakes, each burned with job codes from a surveying firm. Paula's initials, stenciled in bold marker, glared from the sides of bright flags driven into my earth. It left no room for misinterpretation. She had leapfrogged past intimidation into actual site development, investing money, effort, and lies into conjuring a reality where she owned half my life's investment. As I plucked one of the flags from the soil, the truth settled in. Paula wasn't a clown with clipboards. She was a grifter executing a full land seizure in daylight, daring me to keep up with her audacity. She'd been quietly grooming this narrative for months, possibly years, and now laid it bare for anyone willing to believe her. The forest that smelled like rebirth when I bought it was now the theater of her scam, scattered with lies in orange and green markers, each one a blade into legitimacy. I tucked that stolen flag into my binder along with her fake invoices and Nate's screenshots, my anger burning slow under the same sun that shone across my treetops. Because as wild as the harassment had become, I knew then with complete certainty, exposing her retreat hoax wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning of the battle to obliterate her house of lies in full daylight. The morning it all collided was sharp and bright, the sky so boldly clear it felt almost theatrical, as though even the weather wanted to spotlight Paula's performance. I woke up to the groan of machinery groaning through the forest air, not the peaceful crunch of deer moving through underbrush, but heavy metal. From the deck of my cabin, sunlight balding the roofline and dappling between trees, I saw it. A small excavator crawling down the main trail I'd walked 100 times. Behind it rolled a contractor's pickup stacked with lumber and rebar, followed by 2 sedans stuffed with suited men and women who looked wildly out of place in the woods. And at the center of it all, striding with glossy hair pinned just so and her ridiculous clipboard swinging at her side, was Paula, now reborn as a proud project director. At the trailhead, she'd erected a pop-up pavilion draped with white and green banners that read, "Woodland Luxury Retreat, Grand Dedication." Streams of balloons bobbed in the warm daytime air, and a rented catering truck hissed steam in preparation for the ribbon cutting. A local councilman wiped his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, while a tourism board official rehearsed a speech at a folding podium nearby. Paula herself wore a cream-colored business suit and, most laughably, a red satin ribbon-cutting sash, barking orders at workers unloading cement forms beside the Season Creek. The excavator's bucket lunged toward the soil, spearing into roots and earth as equipment operators moved around like this was any other scheduled job. To the unknowing eye, it looked like a proud, groundbreaking moment. To me, it was trespass performed with Broadway flair. I stood gripping the property survey I'd carried in my truck, touched by both fury and disbelief. Paula hadn't simmered down, hadn't slowed down. She doubled, tripled, quadrupled her audacity. In blinding daylight, in front of investors and cameras, she was staging an opening ceremony for a multi-million-dollar project on land that was undeniably, legally mine. The crowd itself revealed the true depth of her manipulation. Neighbors lined up in folding chairs positioned neatly on the forest's edge, squinting under the noonday sun. Many looked confused but polite, their children playing on patches of grass nearby while anxious whispers rippled low beneath the speeches. They'd clearly been told this was progress, development, maybe even a gift for the subdivision. As Paula raised one hand in grand introduction, speaking in that booming, nasal tone about welcoming future guests to our shared woodland retreat, She gestured toward my very forest like it was her grandmother's backyard. Contractors kept measuring. Fresh survey flags glared orange and neon against the green ground cover, and the excavator scraped another load of soil loose with confidence. Every detail had been staged for legitimacy. Tripods and laser levels gleamed gold in the sun like props. Clipboards shuffled between foremen exactly as they had during jobs I'd watched on government projects over the years. Even a photographer snapped pictures of smiling attendees standing before my trees, trying to capture the illusion of triumph and community pride. People clapped when Paula cut an imaginary ribbon strung between two banner stakes, her expression radiant, her tone honeyed with faux compassion. Together we are creating the future of Woodland Hills. I bit down hard on my disbelief, because despite how idiotic it seemed for anyone informed on property law, her spectacle was working. Onlookers applauded. Politicians nodded. Neighbors murmured with wonder like she had actually seized destiny itself. And then, right as the caterers lifted silver trays of sandwiches into the light, salvation came in the form of flashing county vehicles. 3 white trucks with county seals pulled up, beacons strobing red-blue, dust spiraling under their tires. The first carried a building inspector wielding a megaphone, the second a code enforcement officer, and the third Officer Ruiz himself, climbing out with his notebook already open. For a moment everything froze, neighbors mid-bite, Paula mid-flourish, the excavator driver pausing as though holding its breath. The inspector raised the megaphone, his voice shattering the sunny scene. All unpermitted activity must cease immediately. This event is unauthorized. Construction on disputed land is prohibited. Clear all equipment from the area at once. The reaction rippled like an earthquake in broad daylight. Guests shrank visibly, murmurs swelling into gasps. Cell phones leapt into hands, some raised to record while others called spouses in panic. The councilman lost the color in his cheeks instantly. The tourism board official slipped quietly toward his vehicle. Contractors cursed under their breath, began loading their equipment back into trucks, their hesitation ending once Ruiz stepped forward, swinging his badge into view. Paula's face drained, then reloaded with manufactured indignation, her voice shrill against the calm authority now aligned against her. "This is outrageous," she screeched, her clipboard flapping like a useless flag. "This is our retreat. These outsiders are trying to stop us protecting woodland investment." She tried to pivot, addressing the crowd of residents again, but the illusion had cracked. Nora, the neighbor who'd already called her bluff once before, stood in the front row, hand shading her eyes against sunlight, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "If this is your land." Paula then explained why the survey markers show otherwise. Explain why his title is stamped by the county while yours is written in paint on plywood. Silence followed her words, the way quiet can crush even the most staged noise. Paula looked around frantically, a ribbon still hanging lopsided across her torso, her mouth fumbling for rehearsed lines. And then the county assessor arrived, clipboard in hand, high visibility vest bright against the green forest behind him. With no hurry, under the perfect glare of the sun, he announced the coup de grace that left Paula gaping on her own stage. According to verified surveys, the very HOA clubhouse from which you operate sits 12 feet onto Mr. Porter's private property. There it was, the truth delivered with clinical precision, hammer striking through all her props at once. Neighbors gasped, investors stepped back, and phones clicked, click, click as photos captured the symbol of hypocrisy, glowing like a scarlet letter under the sky. Paula's own power structure, her clubhouse, her temple of intimidation, wasn't even standing on her permitted ground. The woman who drowned me under fines, letters, drones, and fraudulent brochures had been running her empire from a building standing illegally on my soil. The scene dissolved rapidly after that, unraveling under direct sunlight for every witness to watch. Caterers packed up their trays, no longer interested in plating victory sandwiches for a fraud. Politicians stammered excuses into their phones, investors slipped into their vehicles without a word, and contractors folded their tripods with the relief of men glad to abandon a doomed job site. Officer Ruiz instructed Paula to take down her banners, remove her signs, and order her workers off the land immediately. The building inspector documented every unpermitted piece of equipment and staked violation notices to exposed poles. The assessor stepped aside to file his notes while several neighbors clustered around me, shaking their heads with whispered apologies. Nora patted my laminated survey still nailed at the trailhead and whispered, You were telling the truth all along. Paula herself had lost the ability to spin. She stood in sunlight that no fog could blur, ribbon sagging, clipboard limp, makeup streaking with sweat reduced from general to ghost. Her shrill protests melted into fragmented excuses, each weaker than the one before. The community, the zoning, fraudulent surveyors. But the crowd no longer bought it. Phones aimed at her now as evidence, each flash capturing her demise under the kind of transparency even she couldn't manipulate. And me, I stood very still, letting the revelation settle, surveying the ground scarred by the excavator and the banners twisting in the mid-afternoon breeze. Because in that moment I understood the full shape of what had just happened. Paula had exposed herself. She had pulled her greatest stunt in the open, and daylight had burned it apart. Her empire had been built on stolen foundations, quite literally on my property lines. And now for once she stood on the defensive. No props or petitions to hide behind, just her and the wreck of lies collapsing under the sun. The weeks that followed Paula's spectacular collapse carried a quality of sunlight I hadn't felt since first stepping onto this land. The forest no longer seemed like a theater under siege. Instead, it was mine again, basking in morning rays filtered gently through canopies of oak and maple. A place meant for breathing, not battling. And yet Paula's spectacle hadn't ended when the county trucks rolled away. It had only turned into what bureaucracies do best: paper, hearings, citations, fines. County inspectors compiled full violation reports under the clear brightness of broad daylight, mapping each illegal stake Paula had driven into the ground. Photos of her banners, excavators, and fraudulent brochures circulated not just through local officials but through the media, which pounced eagerly on the irony of her own clubhouse foundation, trespassing 12 feet onto my parcel. Residents who had once whispered doubt into my direction now crossed my gravel drive carrying apologies, plates of cookies, even handshakes of solidarity. "We should have believed you sooner," they admitted beneath the sun, their children chasing each other with laughter along the forest's edge. The county issued Paula fines totaling over $9,000 for illegal fee collection, penalties she owed directly back to victims across the neighborhood. Every family she had squeezed for trail maintenance or bogus landscaping suddenly held paperwork entitling them to restitution, each sheet shining white validation in their hands. Her so-called Woodland Luxury Retreat LLC registration was revoked publicly, her deposits flagged as fraud, customers refunded through emergency state action, and during one surreal afternoon, when I drove past the HOA bulletin board under the glare of noon, I found residents crowding around as Paula's name was scraped off, replaced by Nora, now voted interim president of the association until a new election could be held. Paula stood at a distance that day, the silver glare of sun on her face betraying the hollow defeat of someone unmasked. She still clutched a clipboard, still mouthed about appeals and charters, but her armor was gone. Nobody listened. For the first time in years, the community was looking past her and toward transparency, sunlight, and truth. But justice isn't only about stripping titles. Sometimes it's about poetic symmetry, and daylight revealed that too. With Nora officially at the helm, the new HOA board confronted me about the trespassing clubhouse, an awkward but necessary meeting held outside mid-morning on the porch while residents watched. Clipboard in hand, Nora said cautiously, "Luke, because part of our clubhouse foundation extends onto your parcel, by law the HOA requires your written permission to use the building going forward." I let the request sit in the air a long moment, my gaze drifting toward the scarlet-painted club structure basking in the sunlight, the very nerve center Paula had wielded like a throne. Every HOA meeting she had commandeered, every fine she'd waved like a gavel, every humiliation had begun from that illegally placed building. And now, by irony written cleaner than any courtroom verdict, access to it ran through me. I nodded. "All right, I'll give permission. $1 a year." A symbolic rent signed in ink under the bright glare of noonday. Residents chuckled at the number, relief floating lightly in their voices while Nora nodded in gratitude, signing the agreement with steady hands. The stipulation was clear. In exchange, the HOA would maintain conservation standards through trails, preserve tree health, and ensure transparent financials reported publicly each year. The crowd applauded at those conditions, not just a new contract, but a cleansing. Paula had tried to create a retreat for profit built on deception. Instead, the outcome became a conservation partnership, reinforcing what I had wanted all along: protection for the woods in the clearest light possible. There was profound irony in it, too. Paula had screamed for months about community protection. And now, stripped of power, disgraced in the eyes of every neighbor, her defeat had resulted in the real protection of these trails she had exploited. The sun warmed my shoulders as signatures dried, and for the first time since hammering my deed to that oak tree weeks earlier, I felt the land breathe freely again. Still, perhaps the most satisfying piece wasn't financial fines, wasn't bureaucratic victories, but the humiliation that daylight forced upon Paula herself. Her empire had been a performance, a carefully constructed illusion stitched with fake documents, intimidation, and stolen money. And illusions collapse fastest not under confrontation but under exposure. Every day, neighbors watched her pass through the subdivision, no longer smugly scolding with her clipboard but moving raggedly, avoiding eye contact, her authority dissipated like dew in sunlight. Reporters had published the story of her grand retreat project folding under violations, complete with photos of her sash, balloons, and bulldozers being escorted off my land. Headlines called it the retreat that never was. Overnight, she'd gone from neighborhood tyrant to local punchline. At the symbolic restitution ceremony weeks later, held under tall noon shadows while residents lined up for refunds, Paula was forced to sign the first annual access form for the clubhouse, her trembling signature scrawled just beneath my name on the page that acknowledged my ownership of the very ground beneath her old power. Families applauded, transparency reforms passed, and children ran free across grass now unburdened by fines disguised as playground maintenance. As I walked the trails afterward, surveying stumps of what little construction Paula's crew had attempted before being stopped, that forest smelled alive again. Filtered sunlight dappled across the creek. The dream I bought hadn't been destroyed by Paula's war. It had survived it stronger, now permanently recognized as mine. The showdown had turned victory not into a shopping center or a retreat spa, but into a protected forest for generations to come. Paula had rolled out banners and balloons claiming she was building the future in secret shade. Instead, daylight had burned her empire, leaving only roots, trees, creek, honesty. My land remained whole, clearer and truer than before. And maybe that's the real lesson of this fight. Power built on fraud survives only in shadow. But when truth is dragged into the open, in glaring daylight where everyone can see, it becomes undeniable.